when we get into a healthy, thriving mindset, when the ambition is healthy, there's room for rest because you understand that that's actually going to be the fuel that moves you forward. There's room for mistakes because you understand that that's actually how you're going to grow and learn. So it's this really kind of more generative, energetic place, right? Like right now, I'm super ambitious. I'm doing like 300 things at once. I have a book that I just finished that's coming out. I have a group program I run. I'm working in corporations. I'm doing a lot of things. But I kind of feel sometimes like a toddler with almost like too much energy. And I do have to intentionally make myself rest, but I know that that's a really important part of keeping this pace over the long term and spending time with my kids.
Hey everyone, I'm Jen.
And I'm Laura, and together we are Mighty as a Mother. We're two girlfriends and working moms who know that juggling a career and motherhood can be equally rewarding and exhausting. So we've created this community where we can discuss the things that matter most. Together, we'll navigate the challenges and relish in the joys with a healthy dose of unfiltered, unscripted honesty and humor along the way.
Hey mamas, welcome back to another episode of Mighty as a Mother. Laura and Jen here, and we are so thrilled to finally have one of our favorite women on the internet here on the show today. If you've ever felt like you cannot win, this episode will feel like a deep exhale. So today we're joined by Anne Welsh, author of The Ambition Paradox. Anne has spent years exploring why so many women feel like they have to choose between being a devoted mom and pursuing big professional goals, and why that choice often feels us leaving stuck and unsatisfied. Dr. Ann Welsh is a clinical psychologist, executive coach, a mom of 4 kiddos who specializes in supporting women navigating the intersection of career and family, and has spent nearly 2 decades helping professionals show up with more authenticity, confidence, and clarity, especially during the major shifts like parental leave, return to work, and career reinvention, which all of us have lived through at least a few of those. She began her career in university mental health at Harvard before building a thriving coaching practice that now serves leaders in healthcare, STEM, law, and more. Anne is also the creator of the Working Mother's Lifeline, a coaching program designed to help moms move from survival mode to sustainable success. Her work reminds Jen and I and all of us that motherhood is not a detour from leadership. It's a powerful training ground for it. And so with that, Anne, we're so honored to have you. I'll pass the mic over to you to share anything with your listeners that perhaps your bio did not cover.
Wow, you got a lot in there. But yeah, I think the big thing is that, I think of career as this thing that has unfolded over my lifetime in really unexpected ways. And motherhood was such a driver of that. People don't always realize I started researching the transition to motherhood before I became a mom. So that was what I dove into as a graduate student when I was like a fresh-faced, 22-year-old. And it was not good preparation for motherhood, right? Like I knew everything. I had studied this. I had talked to moms, and then I became a mom myself and was still really rocked by the transition. And it's, like I said, it's unfolded in these like beautifully unexpected ways, challenging ways too. But I always like to share that, no matter what kind of preparation you have for motherhood, it's hard. It's hard for all of us, no matter what you think. So you're not alone if you're struggling with it.
That's actually resounding feedback that we've heard. We've had a lot of psychologists on the show over the years, and interestingly, all of them say that they studied happiness and or motherhood, and everything changed once they had that lived experience. So it's not surprising, and to hear you say that, because it really resonates, I think, across the continuum. I want to unpack a concept that you have introduced, and I really love this, frankly. You talk about moving from a ladder to a web when it comes to ambition. And I mean, this like really, when I started digging into it, really resonated for me very deeply. Um, we think about the ladder, the corporate ladder, right? And we're climbing it and we're climbing it. And then, we've even, Laura and I, when we were in chief together, we heard somebody in our cohort talk about how she desperately needed to get off of her bedazzled hamster wheel. Laura, I don't know if you remember that from years ago. Yeah, she was a C-suite executive at one of the top, the big four, and she was very, very burnt out as a mother and as a professional leader, you name it. So we've been told when we were young, us millennials out there, that like, you're going to climb this corporate ladder. And for 19 years, for me, my personal experience, I did. And I had very clear goals, just like I'm sure a lot of our listeners did or do have for themselves. Manager by this, director by this, VP by this, my first six-figure role, my first $500,000 role. Like it was very clear the guard post for me around what success looked like as I climbed up, 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 up. And then I became a mother almost 6 years ago, which is really crazy to say. And this web concept that you introduced really was something that I was feeling but didn't know how to put words to. So I would love for you and for our listeners to just kind of unpack the concept of ladder versus web and what you mean by that and how it sort of reframes ambition.
Yeah, I'd love to. And you gave a great kind of snapshot of the latter. I think we're all really familiar with that idea. It's linear. The rungs are evenly spaced. There's only one direction, and there's no room for creativity. There's no room for pause because there's people coming up behind you, and you just got to keep climbing. There's not really a top, right? It doesn't actually end. It's just kind of this ladder, almost like into the clouds. And it's precarious. There's a lot of ways in which you can kind of fail or fall off the ladder. I always use the example of like a law firm as like the really classic up or out mentality, right? Either you climb to that next rung or you fail off of it. And there's not a lot of room for choosing to get off of it. It's really only one direction. And it really only allows you to be ambitious for title, for money, or for power. Those are the only things you get to be ambitious for in the latter model. I think there's a lot of ways to be ambitious. And so that's kind of at the heart of this web model. So, like, if you're listening, maybe not if you're driving or walking, but if you're in your house, close your eyes for a second and just imagine like one of those webs at a playground. Maybe you've seen your kids climbing on them, and the kids are on it in like crazy ways, right? Someone's like dangling upside down by their knees, kids are climbing up, they're climbing down, someone's like eating goldfish in the corner, right? Like there's so much space. It's expansive and there's no one right way to be on it. And that's what I encourage people to think of when they think of ambition. And when they think of their career, because there's a lot of different directions you can go, and you can change directions at any point in time, and you can stop to rest. Right. So you can be the kid that stops and has a snack and doesn't move, or brings your book and sits on the web and hangs out. Or you can be climbing in one direction and shift in the complete opposite, or pivot to the side. And you can make those choices over and over and over again. And when you shift to that model, you end up with room to be ambitious for autonomy or connection or family or space or expansion or time. And none of those things are better or worse than anything else, right? We get to choose for ourselves what makes us well and makes us whole. And that ends up giving us a lot of permission and freedom. Um, and it feels better. And truly, in the end, we end up being more successful because of that shift.
I'm sure when you look back, when all of us look back on all the years we've spent working, whatever work looks like for us, making choices that prioritize the things that you just mentioned on the ladder, not the ladder into the clouds, but the not the money, power, um, and title, but the others that you chatted about. Like those are the things that are going to make us feel the most fulfilled, and those are the things that are going to make us feel like we were successful in life. Yet at many points, especially early in our career, it's hard for us to see that. And, there is a point in time when you're an entry level employee and you are climbing that ladder a tiny bit, no matter what industry that you're in. I'll quote Chief again. Jen and I met in Chief. She mentioned the bedazzled hamster wheel, which I remember distinctly where I was when I heard her say that. But another thing they talked often about in Chief was the thought of a portfolio career and making it more commonplace that you were not having just one single form of employment. You had a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a board seat or a advisorship or consultancy, and you felt more fulfilled that way. I'm curious, Anne, with all the women that you've worked with, how do you coach someone when it's time to redraw their version of success, given that they may be at different points in their career journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the answer is that kind of how do you know you're at a point where you need to make a change of some sort is different for everybody. But I'd say there's a couple like phenotypes, if you will, kind of a couple ways it tends to look. And one is the person that says everything's fine. Everything's fine all the time. It's all fine. And yet I don't, something's off. Like and I can't tell you what it is and I can't put a name to it, but I don't feel happy and I have everything I thought I wanted and somehow it's not enough. And usually they come in saying there must be something really wrong with me. Like I have the job I thought I wanted, the kids I thought I wanted, I have a house that it feels good and yet I'm really unhappy and I don't know why. And that's the kind of turning point of like, okay, well, I think the part of what happened was you were climbing this ladder, if you will, to things you weren't sure that you actually wanted, that weren't aligned with you. The other way it can show up is kind of the more obvious one of like I'm miserable, I'm burnt out, I'm totally fried, or I'm getting there, right? I'm snappy with my kids, I don't feel like myself, I'm not happy at work, it doesn't feel good anymore, and I need to make a shift in some other direction.
I think, in hearing you say this, Anne, I think that it also could simply, I mean, not to oversimplify this, but I think simply it could also be what mattered to us then doesn't matter so much anymore now. And like, if you think about the seasons of life that we've all lived, I'm 41 years old. So for the first, 15 years of my career, I was maniacally focused on my career. I didn't have a spouse, children, my career was everything to me. And it showed, right? In my work and all that. And so my values were very different than they are now. And so if nothing, if I were living in accordance with the values that I had then, everything felt fine. And then as I get older and progress to different seasons of my life, just like our listeners, your values change with the seasons of your life to a certain degree, especially I think in those formative years, right? Like 40 to 50, 50 to 60, I'm not necessarily sure. I haven't gotten there yet, but I definitely felt from 20 to 30 and 30 to 40 that things changed for me. The things that I really valued and meant the most, like my freedom and flexibility and autonomy, mean a lot now. They didn't necessarily mean a lot then because I had plenty of open space. Like at night and on the weekends, I got to do whatever I wanted whenever. I could sleep till noon. I could go on a vacation with 1 day's notice. Like I didn't need any more freedom and flexibility. But now, for any of us who are listening who are mothers, potentially spouses or not even in a relationship, but even just being a mother in and of itself, like your time is not really your own. So you do value freedom and flexibility to a certain degree more because you have less of it. So I think that there's something to be said too about, you know, it's if anybody's listening and what served you then is no longer serving you, like this is your verbal permission slip to say it's okay. We can redefine what our values are, redefine what happiness looks like. There's nothing broken inside of us. It's just that we're being woken up to a different stage of our lives where like different things matter.
Totally, and I think that's actually really developmentally normal. We don't talk about that enough, right? Like we don't finish developing at 20. Ideally, if you look at the literature, we keep developing throughout our adulthood, including your 40s and your 50s and your 60s, right? There's kind of constant opportunities for reinvention and for reevaluation, but that's not the way corporate America is kind of set up necessarily. So it might be values change, situations change, right? Like you said, seasons change. I think um, a big piece that you were getting at is also like the things that we used to do to cope or to handle the stress aren't options anymore. I see a lot of women who come in and it's kind of this sense of, well, I would just outwork the problem. If I had a deadline or if I had 300 things to do, I would work until I got my 300 things done and then I'd sleep. And no longer do we have the choice of pulling an all-nighter or just working all the time because we also want to see our children at some point. And that's the rub. It's like, how do I make this shift into maybe tolerating that not everything gets done? How do I make the shift to change my to-do list or maybe change my career or, what are the tools that I'm going to do to make this more accessible because this old toolkit's no longer applicable.
Yeah. Can you share with our listeners any examples you have from real world experience with clients or in your practice around um, ambition that becomes unhealthy?
Sure, sure. I mean, I think in the end, any ambition that is for someone else is potentially problematic. So I talk a lot about the difference between unhealthy striving and healthy striving, right? What does it look like when we are striving for someone else's goal? That's usually pretty unhealthy. It's also unhealthy if it's out of a place of fear. I think a lot of us are running away from mistakes or we're afraid, of being kind of found out. We're afraid of failing. And, maybe there's some perfectionism in there. And that ambition to kind of ease the fear doesn't work. It's actually a negative feedback loop. You never get to rest if you're running away from imperfection or running away from being found out. When we get into a healthy striving mindset, when the ambition is healthy, there's room for rest because you understand that that's actually going to be the fuel that moves you forward. There's room for mistakes because you understand that that's actually how you're going to grow and learn. So it's this really kind of more generative, energetic place, right? Like right now, I'm super ambitious. I'm doing like 300 things at once. I have a book that I just finished that's coming out. I have a group program I run. I'm working in corporations. I'm doing a lot of things. But I kind of feel sometimes like a toddler with almost like too much energy. And I do have to intentionally make myself rest. But I know that that's a really important part of keeping this pace over the long term and spending time with my kids. Whereas I think if I were coming at it from a fearful place, I would just work 24/7 and I would be distracted. I'd be working in my head when I'm with my kids. I would feel guilty all the time, right? There's a lot of ways that this would show up differently. So it's not about the ambition itself, it's almost more about the feeling underneath it.
It's so interesting to think about too. And I think you also reach a point of diminishing returns. I hear you talk about the women you've coached where, I'd outwork the problem. I'm sure we've all been there at certain points in our career. And I think back and think, gosh, that probably actually was a detriment to creativity, to success, to many things. Yet we saw it as a medal of success because of that perfectionism, imposter syndrome, whatever you want to name the ailment we all may be suffering from, whatever points in our career. So I think that's a really healthy reframe, and one that I think us and our listeners really love to hear as well. And I'd love to like ask about your own personal experiences too, as a mom, as a busy professional. In your book, you described the feeling of being stuck between two parts of yourself. What surprised you the most as you unpacked this paradox?
Yeah, I mean, I was like a classic ladder climber in some ways. I mean, not surprising to anyone that knows me, right? Like I'm kind of type A and a high achiever. I climbed the ladder. I got into medical school, and this was before becoming a mom. And I said, Wait a minute." I had this acceptance letter. I was gonna go, and all of a sudden realized like this is not what I want to do. I don't think it's been what I want to do for a really long time. And so I decided not to go. Everybody thought I was crazy, but I kind of had I had this deep trust, at least somewhere, that this was an okay decision to make. And I at the time said to myself, well, if I did it once, I could do it again. If somehow this is the really wrong decision, I can get back in somehow, even though I had no intention of doing that. So I at least had the kind of experience of jumping off the ladder once. But I kind of quickly just fell on another ladder, right? And I got the PhD and I got the job at Harvard and, had to do it all again. And then I had kids and I had two, was pregnant with my second kid and my youngest was 2. And I was working a pretty intense job at Harvard. And I just kind of got to this place of saying, I'm not showing up the way I want to show up in any part of my life right now. I'm not showing up at work as the clinician I want to be. I'm not showing up at home as the mom I want to be. And something's got to change. And I tried to go part time, and my boss at the time said, "No, there's like literally 500 people waiting for your job, so it's full time or nothing." And I left, and that was a bit of an identity crisis, right? Because who walks away from Harvard and what the hell am I doing, leaving this job that really did feel like a good fit for who I was and I really cared about. It was terrifying. And I think at that point, for me, it was like starting to grapple with the reality of being a mom is like such a huge part of my life. How do I make sense of this? Again, how do I do this in a sustainable way? My own mom had been a physician, so she had worked, she had 4 kids, worked full time. I had seen a very different version of this play out. And it brought up all sorts of questions of like, what are people going to think? Is it enough? What does it mean to be at home? And I kind of grappled with those for a couple years as I started to figure out what work is going to look like for me. And I had two more kids in that time, and there was a lot of kind of identity work for me to do. But in the end, I came out on the other side of it in this really secure place of like, both of these things are important to me, and I'm finding ways to make it work in the different seasons of my kids' needs. And so kind of trying to take my children and what they need at different points and find a way to make my career work together with that.
We always talk about the moms who walked before us, and your kiddos are a little bit older than ours. So I'm curious to know, like, I'm hearing you say you shifted based on your kids' needs, which I think is such a beautiful representation of what motherhood is all about. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because so my son is about to start kindergarten next month. Laura's son is starting first grade. Entered kindergarten last year, so that was like a big shift for us when he went into the public school system, and now we're doing it again with my son. Tell us a little bit about how the different stages of your children's ages impacted your career.
Yeah, so when they were little, I joke that I feel like I lived in a preschool for a little while because my kids are 2 years apart, so I had a 6, 4, 2, and infant at home. And the other thing that was going on in that season is that my husband traveled a lot for work. So there was a period where he was on the road for a week out of every month. So there was a lot of kind of adjusting, and I was the primary parent. So work was a very small part for me for a while. I saw a very kind of a handful, 2 days a week of some patients, and I kept it small so that I felt like I could show up again at work as the clinician I wanted to be and kind of manage it. I would say my mistake in those years was that I did not actually get enough childcare. I was kind of trying to do the admin in the off hours. Childcare is really expensive, as everybody knows. And I think I look back and I just wish I got more help than I did, and kind of really gave it credit for all the work I was doing, not just the person to person work. But I think a big part of it was like, I'm doing two things. I'm doing mom and I'm doing that. And I'm not really taking on a bunch of other stuff. As my children got older and more independent, there was room to take on little bits of other things, right? To try, I started experimenting with doing the coaching, and now I'm doing a lot of writing, and I'm doing some of this corporate stuff. And I think the thing that works well with that blend now is that with older kids, they still need you, and it's not always in the most predictable way. But I have some work that is like time bound and client facing, and I have other work that is still meeting my goal of having an impact and making the world a better place for working mothers, but that I can do on the road or in the, sit by the soccer field, and I can jot down some notes or um, you know do or read an article that I need to read to summarize. Like, I can do now the work. Still has these like person facing activities, but it also has these things that can kind of move with me and move with my children. And then the other piece that happens as they get older is sometimes there are shorter seasons where I have to dial it up or down in different ways. There was a period where my oldest was in the hospital and it was horrible and terrifying. And I just had to shut everything down for 6 weeks. And that was okay too, because I was able to recognize this is happening. This is the most important thing that's going on for me, and everything else can wait. Um, and so I think as they get older, I've also had an increasing tolerance for that capacity to dial it up or down as needed.
I love the dial. I'm like seeing a dial as you're talking to and like thinking about how I could implement that in my own, dial up, dial down. I'm wondering, and could you speak to our listeners who identify with that perfectionist title, maybe recovering, maybe current? They can't be all the places and all the things that they want to be. They feel like maybe a shell of themselves sometimes because they're giving 10% here and 5% here and probably 0% to themselves. How can they cope? How can they move forward?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that can be really helpful when you're starting to address perfectionism, and I want to maybe put a little caveat too that like there's a lot of us out there that are perfectionists that maybe don't even realize it to some extent, right? That, I think so, I remember I once had a client who said, "Well, I'm not a perfectionist. I don't have to get an A plus in everything. An A is okay." I'm like, well, let's make room for an occasional B, right? So I think if you have a lot of black and white thinking around good and bad, or enough and not enough, or success and failure, you still might be a perfectionist even if you don't feel like you have to ace everything. But I think the thing I try to help people do is get more granular with how we define success, and recognizing that we get some things can be in the excellent bucket, right? We can choose like one or two things, not all the things, and have those be excellent, right? Real close to perfect. And then we can choose some things to put in the like solid category, right? Like a solid day's work. And then we're going to have choose the things that we put in the good enough category. And like we just need good enough. And then there's going to be things we kind of say, I'm not going to be able to do that. But like there's this spreading out of our capacity and our tolerance for success and what that looks like, and our time. And when we are able to think about it with a little more flexibility like that, it kind of trains our brain away from that black and white thinking in order to move out of that perfectionistic worldview.
We've used Laura, this is giving me, I mean, leave it to two New Yorkers hosting a podcast to talk about the pizza pie analogy where we say the slices. But that's what we've talked about too, where it's like, you kind of approach it as like every day is this pie, this pizza pie, and the slices look a little bit different. Like one day the work slice might be really big and the family slice might be really tiny, but it's like giving ourselves the freedom and permission and grace to say, like, you're not going to nail it all the time. And we love communicating, Laura and I, over Voxer and like sending each other voice notes about what's going on with life. And like there are definitely times where one of us is saying to the other one, like, oh my God, I'm dropping this ball and I'm dropping that ball. And and then the other one's reminding the other, like, hey, listen, it's not forever, it's just this day or this week that you're working on a deadline, or that the kids are going through a transition. It's like everything is so fluid, and I think that that's something that we've all learned, and probably everybody listening can really deeply resonate with. It's like once you nail a stage of parenthood, everything changes. Like that's the only constant in life, is change. And so being able to like equip ourselves with the strategies to cope with change, I think is really helpful, because it's never going to stay stagnant, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I always like to use the analogy of like standing on one foot, literally, even that like balance isn't static. And if you try to stand totally still, you will be more likely to fall over. Right? If you again, if you're listening and you can, close your eyes and stand on one foot, and you'll notice your ankle and your foot, they're moving the entire time. All the little teeny tiny tendons are making these adjustments, and that's what allows us the resiliency to stand up, and to kind of stay on one foot. And maybe you even tip completely to one side, right? And you stick your arm out and you go flailing, but then you correct, and that's balance too, right? And so again, when you have those moments of, hey, something is going haywire at work and I'm not focusing on my family right now, and I am putting all of my focus and attention here, that's okay. You're not being a bad mom in that moment. You're just putting your focus, you're just tipping, and you'll course correct, and it's going to be fine.
Earlier, I heard you say, and about you were talking about the different stages and transitions of your career, and you distinctly said, I had like deep trust in myself. I want to kind of expand on that, because I think we can all recall a time in the past, or maybe that, situations that our listeners are currently experiencing, where they're grappling with a decision. Maybe they don't even know what the decision is yet, but they know they're going to be at an impasse where they need to make a decision. Something has to give, something has to change. How would you talk to any of our listeners who perhaps are struggling with feeling that sense of faith and trust in themselves and need a little bit of encouragement, more so than the generic, like, trust that everything will work out, or take the leap and the net will appear? Like, how do you foster that sense of trust and faith in yourself to make a decision?
I think that's such a good question, and it's so much at the heart of everything I do, right? Is helping women build that trust. And I think you made such an important distinction, right? It's not like just kind of trust the universe. I mean, that's great if you have that trust, but it is more about trusting, like, I have the capacity to handle this or to do this or to navigate this. And I think it comes a little bit from looking backwards and saying, where have I come through for myself before? Where have I navigated hard things? And can I label them as hard? I mean, I think the other thing we tend to do, especially, I know I'm super guilty of this if we're kind of high achievers, is to brush off the things that we've done as not hard, right? To say, "Oh, I achieved that goal. Oh, but it wasn't a big deal. It's not that important." And so to look backwards and say, where are the places in my life or the things that I have navigated that were hard, and kind of look for the evidence that you've actually been able to do that. And so I think that's piece one of trust. And then, piece two is being able to give yourself some space, a little bit of breathing room. I find that whenever I'm at these pivots or make these decisions, there's usually a whisper that's been there for a while. And I just haven't listened to it, or I haven't heard it, or I haven't wanted to hear it because the change is really scary. And it's when I get quiet, and usually I'll share it with a safe person. And that, as soon as it's out loud, for me at least, that's the time where I'm able to kind of move into making action or taking action around it. And I think that's the value of good friendships. And I know you guys have talked a lot about the power of friendship here, or group support, or a coach, or a therapist, or someone else that can hold that with you and say, like, yeah, I see it too. When I chose not to go to medical school, it was my brother, my older brother, and I said, Liam, I don't know that I want to do this. And he's like, you don't have to. Oh yeah, of course. Right. And then that was it. That's all I needed. And even with, I've been working the right last year on writing this book. And it was probably a year ago where I said to my own coach, like, I think I kind of want to write a book. And she was like, yeah, that makes total sense. Go do it. Right. And I could then kind of take the next step. So sometimes there is a lot of value in like a little bit of interpersonal push or support too.
I'm curious on the trust piece makes total sense. It is trusting and having faith that who we've lived with. We live with ourselves 24/7, 365, that we can do the hard things, name them as hard and such. How about women that aren't really crystal clear on what exactly they want? I mean, one of the most compelling ideas, in your book is about peeling back the what do you think you want versus what do you actually want? So, what are some questions women can ask themselves to help uncover that, to help them move forward and live a more authentic life?
Yeah, and I think I wanna note that if you're having a hard time with this, you are not alone, and we are socialized as women to never ask this question, let alone answer it, right? From day one, we are told to be people pleasers, to take care of everybody else, to shelve our needs, and never, ever, ever voice your own wants separate from anybody else's. So whatever age you are, you've had that many years of really quieting any sort of internal desire, and it's like a muscle. You've got to kind of practice using it. So I kind of use two different exercises to access that. And one is this kind of exercising little bits at a time piece, starting with, like, what do I want for dinner? Can I name like little teeny tiny ones? Can I even just say, like, what do I want to do this weekend with a free hour? Not what do my kids have to do this weekend? Not whose soccer game do I have to go to? But what do I want this to look like? You might not be able to get it, but even just practicing those small things is a way to build that muscle, to get familiar with your wants. But the other tool I like to give clients is the idea of like a closet clean out, but for your identity. And it sounds simple and it takes a little bit more work, but it's, essentially the idea of putting everything out on the table. All of the clothes in your identity closet. What are all the things you're supposed to be? Who are you supposed to be as a mom, as an employee, as a sister, as a daughter? And then label, where did all that come from? Who gave that to me? And it might be Instagram or culture, or it might be, yeah, this one teacher said this thing one time and it really stuck with me. And then once it's all out and labeled, you pick what goes back in your closet. Don't put the suit that's from 1980 that makes you look like you have giant shoulders and you feel uncomfortable and you're tugging on it all day. Don't put that back in the closet, right? Only the ones that feel like the most comfortable, delicious sweater that you feel beautiful in, only those things go back in. Then maybe we have some gaps to fill, but we can answer that "what do you want" question with a little more clarity, because we're only working with the things that already fit.
I love a good closet clean out. So that is like the perfect analogy for me. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like, and that goes back to something we've talked about a lot with like the story you tell yourself, right? Like the story that you tell yourself because that's how you were raised or because that's what you think good looks like. And, like measuring your success by somebody else's yardstick or whatever you want to use there.
I think we're gonna all Marie Kondo our lives a little bit maybe this weekend. I don't know. I'm inspired by that analogy as well. And how often
I'm still thinking about what would you do with a free hour on your weekend? And I'm like, let's find an hour this weekend. We're recording this on a Friday. And I'm like, okay, what can I do tomorrow by myself? I love that idea.
how often should women do this type of exercise? Because it feels like one more thing on the to-do list, right? For everybody, like, okay, oh, I gotta remember to inventory my life. It feels a little bit overwhelming. How can someone tackle that in like a very manageable way?
I mean, I think that I have like a little worksheet, and anybody's welcome to email me and I can send it out for like a really concrete thing. But to speak to the broader question that you're asking, right? I don't think this has to be done quarterly. I think it has to be done when all of a sudden you feel like your clothes don't fit anymore, right? And if you're again back to what does it look like when it shows up? Am I unhappy? Am I feeling numb? Am I cynical? That's it. Like that's one that I get a lot that people don't realize is maybe a sign that this needs to be done is like I just think everything kind of stinks and nothing, no ideas are good ideas. And I'm, you know, these these feelings that are kind of part of the burnout cluster are always really good signs that maybe I need to do a little bit of this. Or if you're feeling really resentful, that's another one, another time to do this.
Do you ever suggest that women do it more proactively so you don't hit burnout, you don't hit resentment, you don't hit fatigue?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess that's the other time, right? Especially if you have bandwidth and space, this is a great exercise to just explore what are maybe some of the things that I'd like to change in my life. Or if you're like thinking about a pivot in a positive or exciting way, and you want to be able to get clear on like making this decision for you versus for everybody else, this can be a really good exercise as well.
I love that. I also love that you have a worksheet on this too. So be sure to link all the things in our show notes. I'm curious, Anne, could you tell our listeners too, when and where can they get the Ambition Paradox?
So the book is coming out next year, 2026. I just handed it into my editor. This is like a long road once you hand it in. If for anybody that's ever published a book, so it'll be next year, 2026. But between now and then, they can find me in the Zoom room leading my group for working mothers. It's where I love to hang out with lots of moms just like you, and they can also find me on my website, which is drannwelsh.com.
So great. We'll link everything there and we'll end with one last question here. If you could leave our listeners with one permission slip today, what would it say?
Ooh, I'm going to give you all, based on our conversation, permission to do something that you want to do, or maybe even just pick the dinner you want to eat tonight.
Sushi, done. Amazing. And thank you so much for being here. This has been a long time in the making. And, this conversation I feel like has been very rich with obviously authentic to us, a lot of honesty, but also just a lot of clarity. If anybody's listening and you love a good closet clean out like I do, maybe take a little time to download Anne's worksheet. We'll link all of that there for you and just kind of like take a look at your life and see where there are some areas to optimize. And I would say to moms, listen, give yourself permission. Like what served you then doesn't have to serve you anymore. And if it doesn't, that's completely fine. We hope that this episode was valuable. And if you have any friends who are feeling any sort of way where you think this might resonate, please share it far and wide. And we will catch you next time. Thanks, everybody.
All right, mamas, we hope you enjoyed today's conversation. Be sure to hit subscribe if you haven't already, and we'd appreciate it if you left us a rating and a review.
We hope you can follow us along on Instagram at Mighty as a Mother Podcast, and we will see you next time.